Allah and good morning, friends. Please join us for the morning devotion.
والله ای طالب ملکوت به الطاف حضرت پروردگار امیدوار باش و از مصائب شدیده این جهان نومید مگرد. الحمدلله خدای مهربان داری که طبیب هر بیمار است و غمخوار هر مبتلا. پناه یتیمان است و معین بیکسان و بی نهایت مهربان. اگر بدانی که قلب عبدالبها چقدر مهربان است، البته از شدت فرح و سرور پرواز نمایی و فریاد با توبا به اوج آسمان رسانی. عبدالبها عباس.
O thou, the Lord of the visible and the invisible, and the enlightener of all creation, I beseech thee by thy sovereignty, which is hid from the eyes of men, to reveal in all directions the signs of thy manifold blessings and the tokens of thy loving kindness, that I may arise with exultation and rapture and extol thy wondrous virtues, O thou, the most merciful, and stir up by thy name all created things, and so kindle the fire of thy glorification amidst thy creatures, that all the world may be filled with the brightness of the light of thy glory, and all existence be inflamed with the fire of thy cause. Roll not up, O my Lord, what hath been spread out in thy name, and extinguish not the lamp which thine own fire hath lit. Withhold not, O my Lord, the water that is life indeed from running down, the water from whose murmuring the wondrous melodies which extol and glorify thee can be heard. Deny not, moreover, thy servants the sweet fragrance of the breath which hath been wafted through thy love. Thou seest, O thou who art my all-glorious beloved, the restless waves that surge within the ocean of my heart, in my love and yearning towards thee. I implore thee, by the signs of thy majesty and the evidences of thy sovereignty, to subdue thy servants by this name which thou hast made to be the King of all names in the kingdom of creation. Potent art thou to rule as thou pleasest. No God is there but thee, the all-glorious, the all-bountiful. Do thou ordain, moreover, for every one who hath turned towards thee, what will make him steadfast in thy cause, in such wise that neither the vain imaginations of the infidels among thy creatures, nor the idle talk of the froward amidst thy servants will have the power to shut him out from thee. Thou verily art the help in peril, the Almighty, the most powerful.
O noble friends, seekers after God, praise be to God. Today, the light of truth is shining upon the world in its abundance. The breezes of the heavenly garden are blowing throughout all regions. The call of the kingdom is heard in all lands, and the breath of the Holy Spirit is felt in all hearts that are faithful. The Spirit of God is giving eternal life. In this wondrous age, the East is enlightened, the West is fragrant, and everywhere the soul inhales the holy perfume. The sea of unity of mankind is lifting up its waves with joy, for there is real communication between the hearts and the minds of men. The banner of the Holy Spirit is uplifted, and men see it and are assured with the knowledge that this is a new day.
O Son of Justice, whither can a lover go but to the land of his beloved? And what seeker findeth rest away from his heart's desire? To the true lover, reunion is life, and separation is death. His breast is void of patience, and his heart hath no peace. A myriad lives he would forsake to hasten to the abode of his beloved.
Glorified art thou, O Lord my God. Thou hast in thine all-highest paradise assigned unto thy servants such stations that if any of them were to be unveiled to men's eyes, all who are in heaven and all who are on earth would be dumbfounded. By thy might, were kings to witness so great a glory, they would assuredly rid themselves of their dominions and cleave to such of their subjects as have entered beneath the shadow of thine immeasurable mercy and sought the shelter of thine all-glorious name. I implore thee, O thou who art the beloved of the world and the desire of all that have recognized thee, by thy name, through which thou stirrest up whom thou willest, and drawest toward thee whom thou pleasest, to open the eyes of all that are dear to thee, that haply they may not be veiled from thee, as the peoples of the earth are, but may outwardly perceive the signs and tokens of thy power, and inwardly apprehend the things thou dost ordain for them in the realms of thy glory. Potent art thou to do thy pleasure. Thou art the one alone beloved in both this world and in the next. No God is there but thee, the most exalted, the all-glorious.
الها معبودا ملکا مقصودا به چه لسان تو را شکر نمایم غافل بودم آگاهم فرمودی مورز بودم بر اقبال تایید نمودی مرده بودم عذاب حیات زندگی بخشیدی اژمرده بودم از کوثر بیان که از قلم رحمان جاری شده تازگی عطا کردی. پروردگارا وجود کل از جودت موجود، از بحر کرمت محروم مفرما و از دریای رحمتت من مکن. در هر حال توفیق و تایید می طلبم و از سماع فضل بخشش قدیمت را سائلم. توی مالک عطا و سلطان ملکوت بقا.
Good morning, friends. We're just going to jump right into it because I'm sure you all would much rather hear our panel than my announcements, which will come later. So I'd just like to ask our panel, Dr. John Hatcher and Ken Bowers, to please come on up. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. It has been, as I said at the outset, summer school is supposed to be an exercise in what a Baha'i community can be like, should be like in the future. And of course, it wouldn't be, I hope, this frenetic, but it would be this loving. And it's been a pleasure. Wonderful group. Appreciate we appreciate your support. No, we do. It's been very lovely. Ken, you want to say something nice to the people?
Well, I agree with that, yes. Well, that's a wonderful statement that John just made, and I suppose one of the questions that we have now is, we've all been together, and one of the things that really utterly pleased me, delighted me, was to see there's not only a wonderful diversity of people here, but one of the aspects of that diversity is age. There's 60 or better, as we heard yesterday in one of the announcements, and there's 59 or worse. And there were plenty of those. There are also plenty of those. I'm in the 59 or worse category. But I was just so delighted and pleased to see so many children and junior youth and youth here. And it really did my heart good. And I, too, was sort of envisioning what a Baha'i community will look like that includes so many different people and such numbers, and the happiness that could generate. And so I think one of the things we can think as we leave here is what we can do to create that same, if you will, summer school atmosphere in our own communities, just in terms of the people and how they're involved and how they're included and how they're able all to contribute to the spirit of the community. So really this was a wonderful thing. Maybe we should take a moment and, John, and ask everybody to thank the summer school committee for their hard work, because they really...
Yeah, I would say that having been chair of a summer school committee many, many years ago, it was one of the hardest jobs I ever had to do, and that's no joke, because it is so complex. It has so many different arenas of responsibility. It's just unimaginable. So those of you who have done it and are doing it, you're doing a wonderful job. And the coherence of this was very nicely done. As I'm sure you'll get a lot of feedback on that you felt like you were... It wasn't just a jumble of nice incidents. It was there was a coherent pattern of theme, of the love and the knowledge and justice, creating this theme. So very nicely done, really was. I wanted one other thing to say before we do our questions, and that is what a joy it is to to be with, I hate to call him Ken because he's Mr. Bowers to me. He's the chair of our NSA, and I have tremendous respect for him.
Just secretary, not chair. I don't have that kind of clout. I'm just a secretary.
He's what we call CEO, and that's even worse than being a chair.
That's right.
Because that means, as you know in your LSAs, it's the secretary who does all the work. But the management of the National Center is a tremendous job requiring a multitude of managerial business skills and so on. And he has done this miraculously well. But he's extremely intelligent. I love him dearly, and I don't want to embarrass him, but I could go on and on.
No, go on.
It really is a pleasure, though, and I'm hoping that we'll have some more time together in the future where we can trade stories and all that kind of stuff. Well, we'll jump right into these. You want to go first, Ken?
Sure, yeah. So what happened was, I guess we had encouraged the friends who had questions to write them down and put them in this box. If you didn't happen to hear that, then maybe if you have a question and there's still time, we can have some of those. Let me see, I had one in particular I wanted to start with. Let me see if I can find it.
Gregory, it's your grandfather. Have some respect.
Yes. Oh, yes, okay. All right, so someone had asked the question, can you discuss the keys to a true consultative process? Well, of course, I think we all have the writings at our disposal, and in particular, in Book 8, I think it's Unit 2 of Book 8, sections 7 through 9, there is a wonderful discussion of membership on institutions and the process of consultation that obtains, when one is a member of a consultative body. There are also some quotations about the importance of consultation for all Baha'is. Baha'u'llah encouraged consultation for everyone, regardless of whether they're on an institution, whenever we have a problem in our personal lives or a challenge that we face, to consult with others whom we respect and love, and with them to try to find the answers or the right path forward. But more especially is it important, of course, on Baha'i institutions to think about consultation. But perhaps we can just universalize it for a moment and think about it. Abdu'l-Baha, in one of the quotations, said that the first requirement of true consultation is absolute love and unity among the members, if it's an institution. Absolute love and unity among the members. Now, of course, that's easy to say, but what does it mean? I can only speak from my own personal experience. I serve on an assembly, and I can say that a great deal of attention is paid by the members of the assembly during the meetings and between the meetings to care about each other and pray for each other and keep up with each other, to be friends with each other. Now, our assembly is one that, the members are scattered around all over the United States, and so we don't get to be with each other in the sense of being in the same community. But to the extent possible, we try to be friends. Love and unity is among people who are truly friends with each other. So we try to do that. We try to arrange times when we can see each other and socialize if we happen to be traveling around the country. And we certainly, in the meetings, we try to build in the meeting times to just be with each other and be friends with each other rather than just all business. And we even instituted a few years ago an afternoon conference call once a week. And the purpose of the conference call was just to see how we're all doing. Isn't that interesting? The National Spiritual Assembly, a weekly conference call, and it's just, hey, what's going on? And everybody would just say what's happening in their lives and what's happening with the kids and what's going on, or have they heard anything interesting about what the Baha'is are doing, or do they have any stories to tell or any experiences? So off agenda. There's not an agenda, but just the idea is to bring each other together and to create a sense of friendship and love. Another thing that we do, of course, is that and I'm just saying just ideas. It's not that this is the perfect recipe, but these are the things that for me have, I think, contributed to an openness of heart that the members have been able to feel with each other. And that openness of heart, that fellow feeling, is the thing that allows us to carry on that consultation. So we have that. In our meetings, we generally make significant time in the meetings for deepening together on various passages from the central figures or letters of the Universal House of Justice, what have you. And the point being, again, not with an agenda to make decisions, but rather to have the experience together of reference to the Word of God or to the guidance of the Universal House of Justice. And again, that seems like an inefficient use of time at first glance. That is, look, it's the National Assembly, surely you've got things to do. I mean, if you ever saw our agenda packets, when I first saw it, I fainted because they're like 200 to 300 pages thick every time. And we have to read that stuff and know that stuff by the time we get in to the chamber. And it's not, I didn't read that, please give me a minute. No, it's got to be read, and you've got to know what your questions are and be ready to discuss. So it's really very demanding. Why would you take out 2 hours or 3 hours also to deepen? Well, what it does is it makes all that consultation far more meaningful, but also far more efficient, because we've taken ourselves spiritually to another level with each other. You see what I mean? Does it make sense when I put it that way? So it's just the time we take. Now, in prayer, in deepening, in reference to, the Lord who's over all of us, we try to bring that into the chamber. Abdu'l-Baha then talks about, after he talks about love and unity, is the necessity of having pure intent. That is to say, that there is an agenda for consultation on an assembly, but that doesn't mean that we personally have agendas for how it all is going to turn out. Our desire sincerely has to be find the truth. And so many times in my own experience, I've gone in with a very firm idea of I know how this is going to go. I know this is the right thing to do. I've never said that openly, obviously, but, I've felt it in my heart many times, only to find myself changing my own mind very quickly once consultation began. Imagine if I tried to hold on to my idea, well, no, I know this is right, to insist on it. Sometimes I'll change my mind in consultation. Maybe you've all experienced it. Every time somebody speaks, I change my mind again, and I go this way, then I'm back, and then I'm this way, then I'm back, and so on. But finally, if we give ourselves the patience and the time, we're able to work it out, and usually we're able to reach a consensus. But it really depends on that. I'm not holding myself as an example of sincerity or anything like that, because we all struggle not to just want to have it our way. But one thing I think I can say I've learned over the course of time is that being right is overrated. It's overrated. And so many times I've seen this magical principle that Abdu'l-Baha talks about, wherein if everyone submits to the will of the majority, even if we think it's wrong, and in one of the passages he talks about this, even if we in our hearts think it's wrong, but we submit,
or even if it is wrong.
Even if it is wrong, and we submit, then God will show the right way. We just rally behind the decision of the institution, we act in full obedience, and there's a particular responsibility for a secretary who has to go and execute the decision, because no one can ever think for a moment that Ken is doing something that he disagreed with in the NSA, that he doesn't like what the NSA is doing, but he's got to go do it. There can never be that feeling. One has to really wholeheartedly support, as if it had been your own idea or what have you, but support it. And so many times the magic of it has shown itself. Sometimes I was just completely certain the assembly was out in left field, and I couldn't believe this decision that had been made, and so on. And then only to find, well, I was the one. Usually that's what happens, is that it was really me. And I just didn't really see the full perspective that the institution was able to see. And in other ways, I've been correct that the assembly was wrong in what it did, in a sense, or misjudged the situation, but not in the way that I thought. But what happened was God opened up another path that none of us had seen before. So we followed it, and God opened up another path. I've actually never had it happen to me, and I can tell you honestly, in 13 years, that I knew I was right and the assembly was wrong, and I was later justified. That never has happened. So now I'm more calm about it. I'll say, okay, now I know the assembly is right. I just accept it. And if not, then Baha'u'llah will show us a way that none of us have seen yet. as long as we're able to move forward. Mr. Lampel says in Consultation on the House of Justice, the test is the opposite. Because if you find yourself in disagreement with the House of Justice, well, it can't be that the House was wrong. And God will later show them the right way. You immediately realize that it's you. So your test is quite a different one. You have to immediately go back and rethink your whole point of view because you've been outvoted by the House of Justice, which now is going left and you wanted to go right. Well, it can't be them. So anyway, it's another thing. So then Abdu'l-Baha mentioned, so there's love and unity, very important. There's this sincerity. And then the third thing that Abdu'l-Baha talks about in this same passage is the freedom of expression. And that's also, I think, a very important thing, that we have to be loving and we have to be courteous in our use of language. This is a principle in the faith. Yet at the same time, we should not feel hampered in expressing our true point of view. Now, I can't say, well, my true point of view is I think you're an idiot. That's not acceptable. And I'm being very crass just to make an extreme point. But that's not an acceptable true point of view. But if I really feel something in my heart, even if all 8 other people seem to not agree, I should still not only be able to, but be welcome. Feel it a responsibility. And they should feel it a responsibility. Listen till all points of view have been expressed, because one never knows. It could be that one point of view that sways everybody else or brings an insight. I don't mean sway in the bad sense of selling someone or convincing someone, but swaying in the sense that it brings an insight or a truth that had not been considered in the other 8. And when considered in a detached environment, may be the thing that really holds the key to where the institution needs to go. And that, I think, we need to learn a lot about. The skill of encouraging that expression being done freely and frankly and in a welcoming atmosphere. But then at the same time, once the opinion has been expressed, that it no longer belongs to the individual who expressed it. It belongs to the group and not to the person. So it's not Hoda Hosseini's point of view that I'm now either in favor of or against. You know what I mean? And she's not, oh, that's Ken's idea or anything. It's another kind of a reality. And I think that it's, to the extent that we're able to do that, it's works to the health of the community. But I think it just requires a lot of practice and a lot of awareness. And we have to help each other. We talk about walking on a path of service. I apologize if I'm being long-winded.
This is a very important topic.
But another thing that...
And it leads right into...
And I say that a lot in the assembly. I apologize if I'm being long-winded. That's one of my pat phrases. But another thing, too, is that we can accompany each other in this skill of consultation. And one of the really beautiful things that I see on the institution that I serve is that we actually help each other in our consultative style, in our consultative approach. So if someone, for example, feels very strongly about a matter, I can't say that anyone ever really becomes strident, but there's sometimes a feeling that, well, maybe you didn't hear me the first time, so I'll say it again. Or I'd like to introduce another thought, but then it's the same thought, and then, you can kind of see that somebody really is attached to an idea. And then there's a break or there's an opportunity, and one of us will just go to the person, we heard you. We heard what you were saying.
That's what Sears used to call yo-yo consultation.
Yo-yo consultation. Okay. We heard
from
you.
The Spanish, I. But it's also, you throw the idea, it comes back, and you throw it again.
Throw it again. That's right. And so it keeps rolling back, and you throw it back out. And so we help each other. And that also is a very wonderful thing, because the person doing it is doing it in the interests of their friend, not because they agree or disagree, and the person hearing it, because they're friends, is able to absorb that and say, oh yes, that's true, you're right, I shouldn't be too emotional or what have you, or attached. And then we can move on and stay. Or if someone tries to introduce an off-topic suggestion or take the consultation from this to another topic, then friends are able lovingly to help the person, kind of maintain the discipline of sticking to the item before we move on to other things. And I'll add that it's not just a function of the chair. I mean, the chair certainly has an important role in managing the flow of consultation and the the dispatch of all the different items that we face on assemblies. But everybody owns the consultative process, not just the chairman, so everyone can help to ensure that the consultative process is healthy.
I'd like to pick up with that and go to my question, which is, how do we deal with our fears of growing and changing the dynamics of our small Baha'i communities? It leads into it in this way. First of all, I've consulted on a number of assemblies, on the regional council, and so on. And I'll be totally frank with you. I have rarely been in consultation where I thought that consultation went precisely as it should. I've had the same experience of seeing it work and seeing ideas emerge that were much greater than the sum total of the individual collective input, that something emerged that was greater than each of us individually. So I've seen it work in that sense. But the main encumbrance I've seen, particularly at the local assembly level, are strong personalities. There's the fact, and it's not the fault of the strong personality. It is the fault of the people on the assembly who allow that to occur. This is picking up on the last point that Ken made. It is the responsibility of every person on that assembly to see that the principles of consultation are abided by. If they're not being abided by, they need to raise their hand and be recognized and say, we are in a sort of like point of order, if you want to use Robert's Rules of Order, but God forbid that you stick rigidly by that kind of format. You shouldn't need to. Another thing is that I used to do when I would, as an assistant auxiliary board member or was consulting with an assembly for the NSA, would be to use, and this is an antiquated image now, but the LSA is the self-cleaning oven. All right? And that is, it has within it the capacity to fix itself if you use the tool of the LSA to do it. And that is, the LSA has two main functions: to solve problems and to create paths of operation, service, plan something. Those are the two main ways you operate. Here's a problem. Here's something we have to do. How do we do it? So a creative process, a problem-solving process, but you use the same tools of consultation in both processes. By self-cleaning oven, I mean if the NSA is fraught with tension, and this can become a pathology in a community. It can endure for years. It is infectious. Where you have a few dominant personalities or a few themes, or there's tension, there's separation on some particular issue, it's vicious. And it's like a disease, and it has to be dealt with like a pathology. Well, how do you deal with it? You take it before the LSA. Anyone on the LSA can put on the agenda by calling the secretary or the chair, please put on the agenda the consultation of the LSA. Now it has to be discussed by the LSA, open and frankly. So that's one point. So I'm dealing more with the specific logistics rather than the overriding principles that Ken was talking about. And what I'm saying is that you as an individual, if you kowtow to strong personalities, or, well, I would like to, bring this before the LSA, but it would cause disunity. Well, the disunity is already there because you don't feel like you should bring it. That's a symptom of the problem. So you need to bring these things to the LSA as a point of consultation. If an individual is dominating the consultation, now remember, you have a chair whose function it is to see that everyone is contributing. No other authority. And to put the agenda together in consultation with the secretary. No one has any more authority than anyone else in the consultative process. If they do, then something's wrong. And this is the single most grievous problem that I have experienced in my life of using this magnificent tool incorrectly. Are these particular things. We can talk about these loving principles and so on, but the mechanics of it, you've got to learn those mechanics. And if they're being vitiated, by individuals or by usually the fear or lassitude on the part of other members that I don't want to disrupt things or something like this. Or you may have something like this, which I'm sure you've all experienced. The LSA will make a decision and someone says, well, I just don't think that's right. I'm just not going to do that. You got a problem. How do you deal with it? You take it before the LSA. It is a self-cleaning instrument. So we could go on. I mean, obviously, we used to have courses on this very thing. All right, LSA training courses. That's how important this subject is. But the tools of it and the spirit of it are there. Now, notice, whom did he quote mostly? Abdu'l-Baha, and that leads to my question. How do we deal with our fears of a growing and changing dynamics of the local community, the small community? I've actually written a book on this. It probably won't be out for a couple of years. But at the end of it, I show these charts. And these charts, which Kid has seen, show that at the upper echelon of the Baha'i administrative order, the Baha'i faith since the passing of the Guardian in 1957 has changed radically, unbelievably. Nothing's the same. We had the Guardian who was functioning both as the interpreter of the word, the learned, and as the guardian of the faith, ruler. He had to function in both capacities the same way that Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha did. All right. He had the hands of the cause who were establishing the pillar of the administrative order of the learning, but these were appointed largely in the latter part of his ministry. Most of them in about 6 months before he passed, well, less than that. And of course, we can go into the history, and that's what Book 8 does, and it does it beautifully, of how this incredible document of the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha established the tools so that those transitions were nicely established. But my point that I'm getting at, very indirectly, is that at the upper echelon we had the hands of the cause in the Holy Land, 9 hands of the cause elected by other hands of the cause, who ran the faith until the end of the 10-year World Crusade in 1963, at which time we had the First World Congress and the election of, not at the Congress, we had the election of the first Houses of Justice, from which, of course, the hands of the cause agreed on their own decision that they would not be eligible. Think how important that was, how selfless that was, but how wise that was. That they would not be eligible for that election. And so you had the election, okay, now you have the rulers, but you had the learned, the hands of the cause, but they got old and they needed assistance. So you had auxiliary board members that would help hands of the cause. Then they died off. You have the counselors, the institution of the counselors established, and then you had the auxiliary board members serving the counselors, and so on and so on and so on. And so suddenly, in other words, but my point is this. At the local level, we are using guidance from Abdu'l-Baha, meaning we have at the local level been more or less static or in the state of stasis for 100 years. We're relying on the guidance from Abdu'l-Baha, who was teaching communities how to function during his administration. All right? Suddenly, in 1996, really, what we didn't feel the impact of it at the local level in 2001, when suddenly we have these alien institutions infiltrating our communities, daring to do something that the LSA didn't directly tell them to do, hopefully helping them. But at the beginning, there was this butting of heads, same butting of heads that used to happen between NSAs and the counselors. Whose territory is this? That took a long time to work out. What was that relationship? And now they are like loving friends. They collaborate constantly. The counselors in the NSA, the auxiliary board members in the LSA, and so on. My point is simply this, that we have not been challenged at the local level for 100 years. until 19 years ago when the Institute process was established, and then in 2001 when the first of the successive 5-year plans suddenly changed the local community, changed it radically. So that instead of the local community coming up with a teaching plan, the local LSA was left with its primary duty, which it was given from the beginning, the governmental aspects of running a community. Marriages, funerals, feasts, and so on. All the things an LSA has to do, which takes up quite enough time instead of what we used to do was, okay, let's have a teaching committee. Same thing the NSA did. Well, let's have a teaching committee, and let's let Ken be the chairman of it, or secretary of it, which was equivalent to chair in a normal business paradigm. And so the NSA teaching committee would come up, well, we've got a plan. 2 months have gone by, but we've got the plan, and here's what we'll do this year. And then it would go down to the LSAs, and the LSAs would get the letter from the NTC and say, well, what do we do? Well, let's elect a teaching committee. Let's appoint a teaching committee. We'd appoint a teaching committee. The teaching committee would meet, and by September, they would have a plan, which then would then be disseminated to the community, which would then take about 3 months to get it in operation. And within a couple of months, it was time to re-elect the NSA and get a new plan for that year. So, my brother and I used to have a discussion that was very fortuitous and very, I won't say prescient, but we sensed that when will the House of Justice take wings and show its full power? That's what we witnessed. The House of Justice doing what it was designed to do, and that is run the faith, guide the faith. And so what happened in 1996 and since then is to not say, NSA, you figure out what's good for your community, and NSA, we need a global, coherent plan. And so it seemed to be an intrusion into our community. Mainly because we weren't really paying that much attention to what the House of Justice said, because it usually was some overreaching guidance, very gently spoken and so on. And suddenly they are giving us specific guidance that have to do with our community. So the question, how do we deal with the changing face of our community, especially in small communities? You use the resources and tools that have been designed to make you a bigger community. And you get these stories, such as the one that Ken told about the woman in Tennessee on his the first lecture he gave. And it was also, I believe, in the American Baha'i. That particular one.
I gave that at National Convention.
Sorry, that was at the National Convention. I just repeated it in my convention report. So it's on there, but it's downloadable, this talk that he gave as the Secretary report. It's downloadable on the administrative website about this woman in Tennessee. And you've heard it a number of times, of these stories of one individual starting something in motion, which turns into something bigger. But they're not doing it as solely personal initiative. It's personal initiative only in the sense they are personally utilizing the tools that the House of Justice has designed. And so the simple answer is, utilize the tools that have been designed to do precisely that, to, instead of fearing this change at the local level, look upon it as divine assistance that has transformed the local community to something totally different of what it's meant to be for the future. What are the local assemblies to be called in the future?
Houses of Justice.
Local houses of justice. And now they're starting to take on that function, and the teaching function is being relegated to those agencies created to do nothing else. This doesn't mean that the LSA has no part in it. It has a tremendous part to play in it, both in a collaborative sense and a creative sense. But the point is, it's letting the local assemblies do focus more on the hard things it has to do in dealing with personal problems, with marriages and so on and so on. In consultation, without hurting each other and doing creative stuff. So that's, again, any one of these questions we could talk about for weeks and weeks. But the short answer about, for me at least, what I'm sensing that is asking about, is the fears of the changing at the local level. It says smaller communities, and I presume it's smaller because, talking about particularly concerned with smaller communities, because you don't have the resources of the bigger communities. The bigger communities will always have stuff to do, whether they're utilizing well the resources or not. But those resources are available at every level, and so you need to become aware of them. If you're not aware of them, most of you here, I'm sure, are. Yes? I'm referring, of course, to the all of those resources set up by the 5-year plans, each of the 5-year plans, and those consist, of course, first there were the 3 core activities of the children's classes, the devotional gatherings, and the study circles. Then in the next plan, they added the junior youth empowerment programs. Why? Because in the first 5-year plan, we thought the way to bring in people to the faith was teach their children. You teach the children and the parents will come. But what we realized is the critical point is, and we realized this by experience, that you need to get in touch with the lives of a growing individual, is that point where they are going to make life-changing decisions. And so the Junior Youth Empowerment Program became the focus. And yet you would say, well, why, if that's the focus, why have we had all of these youth conferences? Because they are the ones who will be the models for and leaders of those Junior Youth Empowerment Programs. So these are the tools I'm talking about. I'm talking about your local teaching committee, your ATC, your CIC, who's heading up the study circles. Not just respect these people and not just love these people, but when you have any sort of sense of antipathy between the local assembly and any of these agencies, somebody needs to say something on the agenda of that LSA and realize this isn't some plan that some NTC came up with. This is a plan by a body that, according to the authoritative text of our faith, as stated in Book 8, is freed from all error. That means they're infallible. That means their plans are infallible. That their plans aren't just, well, this will go away. This won't work. Remember, each one teach one? Well, that geometric progression sounded great, but we didn't have a means of implementing it, all right? So I don't want to ramble on. Suffice to say, the tools that I'm talking about are the infallibly guided plans of the House of Justice. And they're everywhere available. If they're not, all you got to do is ask for help to your regional council, and they will see that an auxiliary board member or an assistant gets you what you need. Okay? So that would be my brief answer to that. And that's a brief answer. Anything you want to add to that? Yeah.
Well, that was beautifully done. Just the word change itself is very interesting because, we all know in the writings, and we've always known for many decades in the writings, this concept of an ever-advancing civilization. Well, what did we think was going to happen?
Change is bad.
Well, change doesn't mean the more people change and become like me. You see what I mean? And because that's change I can live with. I like that kind of change. People becoming like me and believing what I believe and doing what I do the way I want to do it. That's the kind of change I want to see in the world, of course, as a human being. But as a Baha'i, well, change becomes a different thing because, even in one of the talks we were talking about this idea that Baha'u'llah has redefined what religion means. It's not just, here's what I believe and here's what I do and here's how I know who I am, and here's my relationship with God and with the world and all of that. But rather we know that we ourselves must constantly question our own assumptions and question our own level of knowledge and help each other to advance in that level of knowledge, advance in that understanding. Naturally, as we advance, we change. We change ourselves, we change our culture. And one of the beauties of, what John said is, I think it's true. It really is a tremendous step in the spiritual power of the universal house of justice to walk us down that path, to kind of make it happen. That is, for us to accept the idea of change and the definition of what religion means in a new way. That's quite different and quite distinct from anything else we see in the world. That's why you have to have a house of justice. Because otherwise, how could it be? How could it happen that we would voluntarily go through all of this and think and question our assumptions and question the way we do things? It takes a house of justice with that kind of insight and wisdom, but also the power of its covenant to help us to move forward. It's very well done, John. Thank you.
I didn't do it. I was just...
Yeah, well,
I'll take credit.
Okay. So, over to a different subject. As Baha'is, it is important to be aware of current events and share with our friends and co-workers Baha'i principles that inform or address these events. In light of the recent U.S. Supreme Court decision and the general trajectory towards regarding anything less than marriage equality as prejudice, what principles should we share in our discussions with others about homosexuality? Very good question. Very good question. Certainly one that we're facing all the time, and probably you're getting this question from people who are investigating the faith, and when they find out you're a Baha'i, sometimes the first question may be, well, what's your stance, on same-sex marriage? So I have faced this too myself.
Or how do you defend your stance? Because they know it because they've seen it on...
Or maybe if they already know it, often they don't, but even if they do, well, how can you possibly justify, and that sort of a thing. But the first thing is this whole... I'll say a couple of things about it, but I'll preface it by saying that in the American Baha'i that just went to press, I think it's the July-August issues, it's the next one coming out, we have rather a substantive letter from the Universal House of Justice on this subject in print. So each of you will have a copy of that letter, and first and foremost, of course, that's where you will go in order to get your own insights and reckon with these questions yourselves. But I'll just say a couple of comments, and I don't mean this to be a definitive answer or a final thing. But first, let's just talk about this idea of conversations we have with each other or with others, because this falls into an area of discourse. And one of the tremendous challenges that we have at this time in our society is that discourse itself has so deteriorated that subtlety, complexity of point of view, nuance in expression are virtually excluded from the arena of discussion anymore. It's one must be either this thing or that thing. Based on a soundbite answer to a question, which you are expected to provide, you are then defined, either as that thing or this thing. So you are either a liberal or you are a conservative, based on the pat answer you give to the pat question that someone presents you with. Or you're this or you're that, or and you can give all these examples. See how our political discourse does not admit of complexity or of nuance or of subtlety or of explanation. One must say this or one must say that, and it has to be like a tweet almost. And I feel sorry for any politician that has to really give an intelligent response to a question because of that demand for either or. And so we set up these dichotomies that are opposed to each other. Hence the result is in almost any arena of life, we have these opposing camps that butt each other, neither admitting any evidence from the other side. Bubbles of conversation become created where, you just kind of live in your world and you listen to the people who agree with you. You get the idea. You're hostile to anything that doesn't absolutely fit the argument that you have accepted. So it's an extremely difficult situation to be in if you have a belief like the Baha'is have about an issue like this. But put simply, of course, we have a position that isn't either homophobic or completely accepting of the homosexual lifestyle. It's neither one nor the other, as much as people would like to make it one or the other. I was interviewed on NPR a few years ago. One of the questions was this question. And My initial response to the question, I think, disarmed the person. It turned out to be kind of effective. I'm not saying that it would work for you, but I knew that the person wanted to either pigeonhole me as the homophobe or whatever, So I said, well, the Baha'i response to that question is unlike anything else that exists. So it totally disarmed the interviewer. Oh, really? What do you, because they were ready for either you're this or you're that kind of an answer. I said, well, it's not like anything else. No other religion has this response to the question. And, oh, wow, okay. So then I finally had the interviewer kind of actually listening rather than waiting to put me in one camp or the other. You see the point there? And then I just went on to say what you know. I mean, yes, the Baha'is, we have our own view about the proper outlet of the sexual impulse, and it's between a man and a woman in the context of marriage. That is our belief, and we believe that because we believe Baha'u'llah is the messenger of God and that all of his teachings are for our spiritual progress and benefit and for that of society. But at the same time, we don't seek to impose our views on anyone else. So someone who hasn't accepted Baha'u'llah is free to believe whatever they want, and we'll never try to interfere with their lifestyle. Neither will we condemn it. We'll still love everyone, regardless of their beliefs, no more than we would prohibition movement about alcohol because we don't believe in drinking. We're not going to do it. If people wish to have that right, they have that right. So once the person was ready to hear it, the person said, well, okay, well, that's very reasonable sounding. I think that most reasonable people, I mean, not everyone is, and people will argue with it and so on, but most reasonable people will say, okay, well, that's okay, I get that. You're not going to impose on anyone, but you have your own belief. Fine. I've even seen very open-minded or reasonable people who are themselves homosexual have the same response. But in the Baha'i community, of course, we face the people who are investigating the faith and really love Baha'u'llah and feel a connection. But just like anyone else, I mean, once we have two things. Once we accept who Baha'u'llah is, we accept his teachings. We struggle to abide by them. It's not just homosexuals who struggle to abide by Baha'u'llah's teachings. We all do. All of us fall short of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. All of us can rightly hope that whoever we are and whatever that struggle is, as long as we accept Baha'u'llah and are struggling, then we're accepted and loved. And it's the only point within the community is if someone has said that they believe in Baha'u'llah, but then say, but I don't agree with his teachings. It becomes a problem. Well, how do you agree with him but not agree with his teachings or something like that? Then it becomes a question, well, then maybe something else has to happen there. The person may have to grapple with their understanding of who Baha'u'llah is, or where they really feel that they can formally be a Baha'i. But in every other respect, no matter who they are, everyone is welcome to be a part of our community, to be a Baha'i, to be a part of what we do. And it's up to them to decide where their journey will take them. And went up. That's a great question. So if someone already is married, same-sex marriage, and then they're interested in the faith and want to become Baha'is, that question, I don't know if the House of Justice is looking at that question. I imagine that it will, sooner or later, it will examine that question. But to my knowledge, I don't know of guidance that we've received yet about that particular circumstance, but perhaps we will. I'm sure we will, because no doubt we'll face that question at some point. Yes, sir.
Am I on? Oh, okay. Let me add one little bit. What Ken has said is very, very sharp. Insofar as responding to the question in a public forum, but on a personal level, there are other tacks or other things you need to consider. For example, if some of you are homosexual. How do you face the fact that through no choice of your own, you have certain inclinations that are out of kilter with the laws of manifestation you wish to follow and believe in? How do you synthesize that in your being? And there are a couple of things, and I'm no expert insofar as how best to respond to this. Again, each individual case requires an individual conversation and an individual process. You know, we can't just group every person who is homosexual, because while we don't know all of the physiological or psychological implications of why someone is heterosexual and why someone else is homosexual, what we do know is that we do not condemn someone, even ourselves, for something over which we have no control. So the inclination you cannot condemn, nor should you feel guilty about. But the guidance of Baha'u'llah, as he says, is true freedom is in strict obedience to my commandments, little as you know it. Now, that little as you know it, as I said in my talk, is very important, because it means you can't see the end of the beginning right now, but eventually you will. So even though this may sound restrictive and constraining, it's actually an assistance unto you. So none of the laws of Baha'u'llah, and this is very important to understand when you're talking to someone else, none of them are capricious, none of them are arbitrary, they are all logically based, even though we can at this point see the logic, or may not see all the logic. So it will remain in the future, when we come to understand more about human sexual orientation and where it comes from and so on, that we will understand better how to respond to this. But the point is, of course, as Ken says, in general, we welcome all people into the faith, and we're all struggling to abide by the laws. That law is no less constraining on a heterosexual who is not married than it is on a homosexual. All right? So we're all tested in that sense. But so you've got your public response, which is a good one, but you need to deal with the individuals very carefully, very lovingly. Because if someone's drinking alcohol or is an alcoholic and comes into the faith, what do you say? You know, try. It's one thing, you know. And so each case has to be dealt with individually. So if you have someone who was an alcoholic, now they're drinking again, and you, as an LSA or as an individual, you try to assist them with whatever tools you have. You know. So, and if the person is insistent, well, I don't care about the law, I'm going to do it, and if I'm a public drunk, it's too bad. I'm still a Baha'i. No, that's where the community gets involved. But at any rate, so there is the public response that we have as a community, but there's the individual response, which has to be more geared to a specific individual and that individual's problems. Or in the case of a gay marriage, here's our situation. We would love you to join our community. Let's see how we can deal with this, and you deal with the institutions and so far as guidance is concerned. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just one other thing is I think we can also search our own hearts, because it is possible to have prejudice. And the question was about, well, let's not make people think we're prejudiced, but as individuals, as a community, no, but as individuals, we also have to search our own hearts and be sure that we ourselves also don't think less of anyone because of that which they have not chosen, you know, as a sexual orientation, and we shouldn't have that in our hearts. Think any less of them as any more than any other thing that we might see as less than perfect, because, again, we ourselves are less than perfect, and not look at it as a moral failing of some kind.
Mental illness is another one that we're dealing with in the Journal of Baha'i Studies. It carries a stigma as if you were spiritually weak if you have some depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, or whatever. So, again, try to be just even as God is just. And just means fair, and it means that nobody gets blamed for something over which they have no control. Of course, you always have these splitting hairs of at what point do you have control? And of course, that's something between you and God. Mm-hmm. This led to my second question, which I can answer very quickly. It ties in this sense. Why only men are allowed on the House of Justice? Well, that's an easy one.
Okay.
The answer is that there is a logical reason which has absolutely nothing to do with any distinction between men and women. And as Abdul Baha says, it will become apparent to you what that reason is, and when it is made apparent to you, it will be as clear as the sun at noonday. But it has nothing to do with the equality of women and men, either in capacity or in any other way. So what does it have to do with? You can guess if you want, but I'm going to wait till the sun coming up at noonday to be sure. Whatever it is has to be circumstantial, because it is not ontological. Men, and you think you're going to have gender in the next world? No, you're not. You're not going to have the equipment, and you're not going to have anything else, all right? All right? So, in other words, obviously, men and women have always been equal, but what has kept the change is because, as Abdul Baha says, because society up until now has been based on power, and power was in the hands of men. That's now changing, but it's changing horribly gradually. And we're only now, I think, as we're becoming aware of other cultures, how horribly ingrained and grievously ingrained it is. Yes?
Robert Stockman had a really excellent speculation, which I like, and that is because women are not on the House of Justice, they can be much more aggressive and open to teaching women. And that men, especially close to the election, have to be kind of standing back because they wouldn't want anybody to think they were campaigning to be on the House of Justice.
Any response like that, and I love Rob, and I think he's doing a great job with the Wellman Institute, but any response that pretends that it will obtain into the future is a priori wrong. You understand what I'm saying? Any answer that pretends that this will be an eternal condition is a priori wrong. In my opinion.
In fact, anything we've said here today is a priori wrong. So anything, so you just, let's just. There's a hand there, John, I think.
There's a what?
A hand.
Is it coming at me?
Please ask your question, man.
Does it have a fist on the end of it? Excuse me, a little louder, please.
Thank you. When we were doing book one with Seekers, someone had actually asked that question, the question you don't want to get when you have new seekers. Why aren't women on the Universal House of Justice? And one gentleman said, well, it looks really clear to me. He said, Baha'u'llah was just protecting the women. Like, duh. That's what he said. He said, could you imagine? So I just wanted to share that little...
Well, if that made sense, then there wouldn't be women on the NSA either, or there wouldn't be women counselors. In other words, if it had anything to do with something women were protected from doing or women shouldn't have to do or anything like that, then women wouldn't be on the institutions that are the next highest institution, if you will, Baha'u'llah House of Justice, the ITC or stuff, are on NSA. That wouldn't make sense if it were. That's what I'm saying. But again, the best response is this. In my opinion, we don't know yet, but the writings say we will know, and that when we do know, it will make perfect sense. And it will be logic. But we do know it has nothing to do with the equality of men and women. I don't know. Yep, I don't know if you heard, Hoda said that the language, specific language says they are exempt, which would imply legally that they don't have to, not that they never will be. But at any rate, the fact is that we're taking this from the fact that the language of the covenant documents say the men of the house of justice and so on. But, let's not dwell too much on this because we've already said we don't know, and we've already said at some point we will know. And one thing is clear. If it's as clear as the sun at noontide, we will know that we know when we know.
Every books of the holy books of the religions, they call God as a he. What about she?
Obviously, God has no gender. God, it is simply a literary acculturation thing that has occurred up until this point. We look at God in a parental mode, so God is the Heavenly Father, and so on. Perhaps in the future, it's hard to identify with an it and have love for an it. And of course, there are religions in other cultures in the past where the primary deity was female. So it hasn't always been true. So, I mean, there's no good answer other than it is simply something we are doing for now, you know. Yes.
In Farsi, there's no like he, she. So that made a lot of sense to me that it was just translated in that one way, and I've never worried about it.
But there is an Arabic. There is an Arabic, a he, she in Arabic. And Baha'u'llah also revealed in Arabic, and it is he in Arabic.
Yeah. So, you know, your guess is as good as mine. Or maybe not as good as mine, but it's pretty good. All right, go ahead with the next.
I think we have another question over there with the mic.
Years ago, it is on. We had a seeker who we knew not to go just into that subject with her. And she later tearfully told us after she's been a Baha'i for a year that if she'd learned about the House of Justice when she was seeking, she would have never, ever, ever joined the faith. And her tears were because it would have been such a shame to have been kept out because of that. So I thought that, so when she did ask, the answer was exactly what you'd said. And she was so satisfied in not knowing. She was happy, and she was also happy that nobody was telling her what they thought it meant. There was years ago, a Hand of the Cause, apparently, from a friend of mine's report, had asked this question all over the world and said that every answer was culturally skewed. Every single answer had its own cultural reference point. But as a teacher, I find that I have to look at people and say, there's some subjects I'm not going to just jump right into and try to explain when I have no qualification to do that. And she was very thankful, and still is a good Baha'i all these years later.
Well, again, the simple answer is, if you can be sure if we knew, we would know we knew. You know, as if it's as clear as that. But yeah, I'm glad that I think that is the best response is we don't know, but we know none of the laws of Baha'u'llah or of this faith are illogical or arbitrary. And so there is a reason for it, and we will eventually know the reason, and it will make sense, and it will be logical, and it will be just. You can, yes. The answer is yes. You can have as much speculation as you want. You have my permission to speculate all you want. Just don't have it on tape if you're smart. All right, let's have another question.
Okay. Is my mic live? Is it okay? Can you what's our time frame, by the way, just so we know? 10:25? 10:45, the session ends. Okay. 55. Okay. All right, so we've got another...
When the sun reaches noonday time.
Yeah, that's right. Right. It's amazing how something that we can't answer is always the one that provokes the liveliest discussions. That's always, it's always like that on that
because
question.
we're insistent. It's the insistent self.
I guess we just...
They're insistent selves. We're okay.
We're okay. Yeah, no, but it's really interesting. It's a fascinating aspect of who we are as people, that we yearn to know answers to our questions, and we want to know and we want to understand, and we can't help but try to figure out, even though we know that we have to be patient and wait, still it's very interesting about us as people.
But there's a time when we will know. Everything will become apparent after we die. So we just have to wait until we die.
Okay. That's... Okay.
Yeah, but you can't, we're not supposed to commit suicide, so you can't hurry it,
Okay, so just moving on again, can you discuss what 3 to 5 things you believe the Florida communities need to do to grow or to progress the faith? Well, I think many of us would give the same response to this. I mean, as John was saying earlier, we really have the instruments in our hands for the growth and the progress of the faith. We have a plan. It's been given to us by the head of the faith. So in one level, there's really no question, what the things are that we need to do. But what was interesting to me about the way the question was phrased, the 3 to 5 things. Well, I just want to talk about that, the way that is phrased, and with apology to whoever asked the question, it's not intended as a criticism, but it leads to a very interesting insight that I think we now are acquiring about the nature of growth. Going back to the 1980s or so, it became very clear in the plan before the Holy Year, that 6-year plan, that something very different was afoot in the Baha'i world that was prompted by the Universal House of Justice. The House of Justice, for the first time, delegated the setting of national goals for a plan to the national spiritual assemblies of the world in collaboration with the counselors. Until that time, the head of the faith, namely the guardian, because there weren't international plans in the days of, not formal plans in the days of Abdu'l-Baha, nor even for much of the guardian's own ministry. But later in his ministry, and of course toward the end, you had these national plans and then the International 10-Year Crusade. And then the House of Justice took that up and continued with global plans. But the head of the faith always was the institution that set specific numerical goals in every category for every country around the world. For the first time then, at the beginning of the 6-year plan in 1986, the House of Justice announced that it would, from that point forward, be the national spiritual assemblies with the counselors who would formulate the goals. And then they said a very interesting thing, that delegation of authority to the counselors and the NSAs to set these goals in itself was a move of such historic significance as to mark the opening of a new epoch in the development of the faith. So a new epoch opened with that decision of the House of Justice to devolve that decision-making process. And what that might indicate, of course, you're free to make of it what you wish, but what it might indicate is this idea that another level of responsibility for understanding growth and understanding how to pursue growth was now being asked of institutions below the head of the faith, starting with the counselors and the NSAs. You see what I mean? So, as it were, it's not that we didn't think about growth until then, but we didn't really have a formal institutional responsibility to have a consciousness of the process of growth to the extent that the House now was challenging us to acquire. Now, at the end of that plan, of course, we had a Holy Year, and during that Holy Year, the House of Justice introduced a statement and a compilation called Promoting Entry by Troops. This was a landmark moment for the Baha'i world, because until that time, there were all kinds of different ways of thinking about the massive advancement of the cause. Entry by troops is as the phrase that we use. Some people thought that entry by troops was going to be something that would just happen according to circumstances entirely out of our control, that Baha'u'llah would bring, or the hand of God would bring, suddenly, and after maybe some calamities or what have you, we would have entry by troops. But it wouldn't be anything that we would concertedly work to have happen in an organized way. But the House of Justice contradicted that, saying that we had a responsibility to understand, accept, and implement a process leading to entry by troops. This was what they said in the cover letter. Okay? To understand, first to accept it as a reality, accept that it could happen, then to understand it, and then to implement it. And then in the compilation, what we began to see was that there was no single key to entry by troops. What we began to understand was that the growth of the faith really depends on an array of efforts, multifaceted efforts, which together, in the aggregate, lead to the growth of the community. And as the House of Justice famously said in that cover letter, there should be a realization that no one person can do everything, and not all people should do the same thing. But rather, we all have certain talents or inclinations or capacities, what have you, and in the whole, they all contribute to that growth. But there is a need for us to understand how they cohere, how they come together. There is a need for institutions to coordinate the energies and the capacities of the friends so that they all are, leading towards the same end. I mean, it's sort of the difference between, and I'm using my own metaphor, I mean, there's a difference between handing out pitchforks to a mob and having a trained army. Where with a trained army, you recognize there are different talents and capacities and this and that, but you have order, you have regimentation, you have a plan, you have strategy, and so on. And then an army can do a lot more than a mob with pitchforks. And if it's a militaristic metaphor, I'm sorry about that, but it's the idea. You see the idea. Not just everybody go out and, take the village, but we're going to do this in an organized way. So you have to have that as well. So they raise the question, how does the individual and how do the institutions and how do the communities as a whole interact as what they characterize as the three chief protagonists? So again, we were being challenged to have a far greater understanding of the process of growth. As I mentioned, I think in one of my classes that there was a time as you traveled around the country when we talked about entry by troops, people tended to latch on to one or two things as the key to entry by troops. And so I saw the word key, the 3 to 5 key things that we can do. Well, they're all important things. But I think that what we're being challenged to do is have a different kind of consciousness about it. So that now we can see, now that was 1992, we had a 3-year plan, then we had the 4-year plan when the Institute process was introduced to us. Now we've had 19 years of experience, as John has said, and it seems to me that we're challenged to have a higher and higher consciousness of our own about what it takes for growth to happen. So 2 things are true at the same time. What John said is correct, that the House of Justice is, in a sense, making us do certain things, that are uncomfortable, introducing new concepts, new ideas, new institutions. But that is not in a way to dictate to us what happens as if we were just unthinking recipients or respondents to a plan. But rather, what they're doing is they're challenging us to think far more deeply than we ever have, to be creative, to be innovative, but also within a framework of action that guarantees that the result of all of that will propel us in the proper direction. So it's a very fascinating thing. It's difficult to say the 3 to 5 things then in that case. We accept instead that we have an organic process. It might start very simply. In one setting in Florida, there may be an isolated believer, and the process, as the House of Justice describes in one of the letters in this plan, begins with that person having a meaningful conversation with another soul. And that's your key thing that you should do, because it's the first thing that happens. So that's the one key thing, you would say, is that's where it begins. But then from that conversation, a relationship is built. And from that, a path of service begins to emerge. What is that path of service? It depends on the nature of the conversation and what they're interested in and how they combine and what so I even gave examples. Is it a mother who has a child but is interested in the spiritual education of that child, well then maybe the second key thing is we provide for the education of that child. Or is it a man who is ill and just wants to sit and pray and read the Word of God with someone else? Well then the second key thing is that instead of the children's class. But however it goes, and it can take its own path, it will evolve organically. And the key things, if we can call them that, will then emerge in a sensible and meaningful way according to the particular context in which it arises. Now, there are principles that govern all processes of growth that are universal, that we can see happening, but the specifics of how they unfold might be varied. So all flowers are flowers, but not all flowers are the same flower, right? Not all of them are the same species or color or fragrance or pattern or what have you, but they all grow by certain rules, and they're all flowers and so on. So it's the same kind of a thing, but we have to master that skill of growing those flowers according to the soil and the situation that obtains wherever we are, wherever we live. On the other hand, you may have a community of 100 believers, and it would be hard to reduce things down to 3 key activities. Maybe there could be an entire tapestry of things. And I think that one of the things that the House of Justice is doing in this generation, because the House of Justice, as you remember, said in 1996 at the outset of this plan that by the end of this 25-year period, the goal would have been to have advanced the process of entry by troops. That is, by the year 2021, the end of the first century of the formative age. And it seems to me that the various strands of activity that the House of Justice has been encouraging kind of as threads of activity. The Institute, social and economic development, the development of institutions, external affairs work, engagement in the discourses of society, all these various threads of activity, the arts, anything you'd like to name, all now are being woven together into a pattern such that hopefully by the end of that period in 2021 we can begin to see emerging what a pattern of Baha'i community life begins to look like. So we can kind of say, well, that's it. That's basically what we need to be doing. Those are basically the elements. And essentially this is how they all fit together to make Baha'i community life. And I think that would be a tremendous achievement and a tremendous advancement in our understanding of entry by troops. Now, it doesn't mean that we will have achieved entry by troops. They didn't say the achievement of entry by troops, but the advancement of a process. And maybe it will still be some decades or generations hence to see entry by troops fully realized in every country of the world. But this will have been, at least in my own estimation, this will have been, this 25-year period, which we have had the privilege to serve in, will have proven the point of major change, the major turning point in the faith, where we've gone into a faith of learning and of capacity building and of understanding of what it is that we're about. So a maturation of our community as a whole.
Yeah, I would add to that just about one point, and that is that when I said a few minutes ago that my brother and I used to speculate when the House of Justice would spread its wings and show its full power. And that's what these plans have done for me and for my brother as well, even though he was only able to see the bare initial stages of it before he passed, is this incredible insight, which an infallible body tends to have, and that is, you cannot, as I said in my own talk, legislate morality. You can't change people from the top down. You can make them do certain things if you have enough power. But if you want authentic change in people that is based on morality and virtue, it's got to start from the bottom up, at the family level, the community level. And that's the ingenuity that's one of the strands of ingenuity of the whole thing. And that is, this body at the top is saying, begin down there, not up here down. We're giving you the tools where you can do it here, to build a skeletal framework. And it comes into play most importantly when you look at the overview of history that Chogi Effendi has provided us about the future. First will be the lesser peace. But that won't be a Baha'i event. That will become about by secular governance. And it won't come about because people are suddenly changed and transformed. It will come about by necessity. What kind of necessity, we don't know. But it won't be pleasant, we can be assured, because it's going to be sufficient necessity that will overcome the prejudices, biases, and individual grappling for power. In other words, something that would be sufficient to overcome the egos of world leaders. What would that be? I mean, I don't know what it would be. So, and then you go into the future and you see that the Baha'i faith at this ground level, building the skeletal framework, will grow parallel until they ultimately dovetail. And the powers of that tribunal described in the World Order of Baha'u'llah will be taken over by the House of Justice. The Guardian says this explicitly. They will be merged together in the House of Justice. And at that point, when you have this dovetailing, where you say, well, we've got two parallel systems and they're coming with the same ideas, why don't we just make them one? That's when you have the golden age of this faith. That's a long ways away. Meanwhile, we're building this process, and now we can see into the future how we're going to do it. We don't know everything, but we know we do it at the ground level, that we do it at the community level. And that insight itself, that it has to happen from the bottom up, not the top down, is, I don't think in history has ever occurred before, not on a massive level. Well, I've got two questions here that I can answer as one, because they're very simple. And one simply says, can you discuss consciousness? Where is it? How is it? What is it? And the other one says, can the existence of the soul be proven scientifically? And of course, they're both dealing with the same thing, and that is the powers of the soul, the powers of human consciousness. And so the simple answer is yes. Now, if you want to know how, I'll give you just one example. The NDE experiences have been largely poo-pooed until recently as being simply anecdotal, having no particular validity, because they are, according to some, the last gasp of the dying brain to create an illusion because it fears dying. It fears dying. I don't know why a bunch of cells would fear anything. But the fact is, when you have, however, of an NDE experience where someone recounts something that occurred not in proximity to that body, in another room or in another place or something, and it's verified and validated, as so many have been, that means the consciousness, number one, is not dependent on the brain functioning, that it is separate from it, and so on. That in itself is proof, number one, that consciousness is not dependent on the brain, it's associating with the brain, brain-body complex, and that it is a metaphysical property. So how do you prove it scientifically? Well, on the one hand, you can't use material tools to prove a non-material thing, but you can use a sequence of events to prove something. So it's becoming more and more proven, and a lot more scientists are coming to accept the fact that whatever is making this brain work is not the brain itself, because if you think about it, that doesn't make any sense, that a random collection of neurons can have a consciousness and decide to do stuff. You see what I'm saying? Well, at any rate, you can see what I'm saying, but if we can just get our scientists to see that, that would be wonderful. But yeah, it is being proved scientifically, and a lot of scientists are starting to accept the fact that there has to be something outside the brain-body complex that is coordinating this thing. The ND experiences are valid proof when they are sufficiently documented and when the consciousness continues and describes things that it could not have possibly done physiologically in a physiological association with the brain. So yeah, there are lots of ways that are being proven. It'll become more and more. Of course, the most recent fad book on this was the neuroscientist. No, he was a neurosurgeon, wasn't he? Yeah, a neurosurgeon who had this. I'm not too crazy about his book, but at any rate, it's a big smash because it seems to be about as scientific as you can get, insofar as he uses scientific terminology and analyses to show that by all accounts, my brain was dead, and yet I had all of these experiences, yada, yada, yada. So I don't mean I do mean to be glib. But the fact is that in addition to being glib, I'm being serious, and that is, yeah, it's possible, and yeah, it's being proven. And so consciousness is simply a property of a power of the soul, as I said in my talk, and the existence of the soul or a metaphysical ingredient to self is being proved, and it's wonderful because science will discover spirituality whether it wants to or not, because it's true. And what science and religion have in common is they're both trying to discover reality. And because reality has both metaphysical and physical aspects to it, as they examine this thing called reality, they will discover each other. Where they were just looking, we were looking at the same thing from different points of view, yeah. And that's what we are. We are physical and we are spiritual in association with each other, even as physical reality and spiritual reality are in association with each other. And so you can't study one without eventually discovering the other.
That discourse actually is really beginning to take shape in scientific philosophical circles now. I mean, because physicists, for example, are finding themselves at a point where
they're in a mess.
It's a kind of a mess. But what's going on is they're actually having now to do things that they've always criticized the so-called religious people for doing, taking leaps of faith based on limited empirical evidence and only postulations. Well, that's where they kind of are now. Their mathematics are going beyond things that are going to likely be possible to empirically prove about the nature of the universe and subatomic levels of existence and so on and so forth. And they're getting to areas where they're losing the ability to find their way and to prove anything, yet they're still accepting certain things because mathematics shows it to be true. Well, can you really do that? It's a leap of faith. And they don't like the leap of faith because they keep criticizing the other guys for the leap of faith. You can't do that. So it's going to be interesting to see where these two come together. And
it's daily these things are happening. So we're in a very exciting age in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Background. So let's thank our panelists,
Great.
Dr. Hatcher, Mr. Bowers.